This is Marsha Stonehill with Melt the Ice. Today on Operation F.L.O.W, I have with me co-host Dr. Vivienne McDaniel. Dr. McDaniel, it's been a while since we've had a conversation, and we're doing this one fairly spontaneously. There's just been some repeated information that's been out that is important to have a conversation about. It persists. This material that we're about to discuss, it's out there, it's accepted, it doesn't go away, but it perpetuates ideas and biases that we're trying to conquer through our diversity, equity, and inclusivity conversations. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And it's good to be back. I've missed you.
I missed you.
So, yeah, I keep hearing people make comments such as, and I think you and I spoke about this very briefly before, there are certain things that shouldn't be said. They shouldn't be said by Black people. They shouldn't be said by white people. They shouldn't be said by anybody, really.
Right.
And it was one thing that I heard when I was a child. And I won't call out my relative who I heard this from, but one of my relatives said, made a comment, oh, well, she look okay for a dark-skinned person. And I'm like, what is she talking about? You know, I consider myself a dark-skinned person. So what does she mean that she's pretty? The statement was, oh, she's pretty for a dark-skinned person. And the relative that said it is very light, they're fair-skinned. And I'm like, what in the world do you mean by saying that the person is all right are they pretty for a dark-skinned person? And it just irritated me even as a young person. I was very young when I heard this. And another thing that I hear is I have a friend. Oh, the doorbell just rang. I wonder who this is. We have someone that's joining us, Marsha.
Excellent. So I know that we invited Juana Chambers Lawson to join in this conversation. Here she comes.
Here she comes.
So hang on, listeners. We're waiting for her to sign in as we carry on with this very important conversation that becomes awkward, I think, for a lot of people to have, or it can immediately digress into a heated argument instead of people really being able to embrace what's being requested to understand here, right?
Yeah. Another thing, as we wait for her to connect to audio, another thing is making statements that, oh, well, I only date, if you're a Black man, I only date white girls white women because I don't want to have to deal with people, with Black women, because they're either mad Black women or they just talk too loud. I don't want to deal with that. And that's another thing that kind of irritates me as well. Welcome, Juana. LJ.
Good morning.
Good morning. It's so good to have you here with us. We're talking about people that think it's okay to say certain things like a Black man who only dates white women, who says, I only date white women because Black women are too loud, or they're always angry, or light-skinned women calling, saying that, oh, that person looks okay for a dark-skinned person, or a person that's dark-skinned who says, and I'm talking about Black people, I'm talking about my people, or a Black person who says, oh, well, she thinks she is all that just because she's light-skinned. When the person doesn't even think like that, they're just trying to be themselves, you know. So I'm glad you're here, because I want to hear what you have to say about that. I mean, I'm just having serious issues about things that I'm hearing. Let me give you some more before you jump. Let me give you something else before you go there. I have friends who call me gal, and they have no earthly idea. They just don't. They don't know that Black women have issues with being called gal because of when we were enslaved, when our ancestors were enslaved. So they're just certain terms that people use. Speak on it, sister.
It's true though, because, you know, especially when you say gal, right? Gal is that's so culturally specific. You know, when you think about like the Caribbean and the West Indies, okay, gal, whatever, but still that's not respectful. You know, when we refer to a gal, it's more of like a, you know, that's a bad gal, you know, like it's a street term, it's colloquial. That's not how you refer to a woman that you respect and that you highly regard, right? It's the same thing like you said with colorism, though. Colorism, you know, it's so strange to me these days that people don't understand the difference between racism and colorism. You know, they want to say it's about crabs in the bucket mentality. It goes so much further than that.
I totally agree.
Mean, Willie Lynch is still alive. Willie Lynch is still alive and well in our heads.
Yeah. It's amazing. And what bothers me is that when you're saying it to when you're talking like that and you're saying things to a white person, you know, and I'm going to ask Marsha to jump in on this, you know, what is it? What do you think, or what are you saying? What's in your mind when you're hearing someone say that, when you know better? Marsha.
You're asking, I guess, let me, wow. So what's going through my mind right now as I listen to each of you, I'm thinking about a lot of the resistance statements that arise when these types of conversations are happening. So I would like to just kind of lay that out on the table so that people who are listening to this, that are in the background saying, when are we ever going to get past this? You know, well, that was decades or centuries ago. Why aren't we over this yet? Or people just need to stop being so sensitive. You know, people need to toughen up. You know, well, people say bad things about people all the time. You just have to let it roll off. So these are the types of things that, I guess, like we were saying earlier, Vivienne, it kind of shuts down the conversation and then it digresses into an emotional argument instead of a constructive conversation. So, you know, we've had so many things throughout the decades as far as like being politically correct. So then other people say, oh my gosh, you can't say anything anymore without hurting somebody. And this becomes another defense and another resistance to learning. And as you said, it's about being respectful. You know, I think many times people will make statements that are cynical or sarcastic, and then it's followed with, well, I was just joking, or I was just kidding, or why can't you take a joke? You know, why are you being so sensitive? So those are strong defense mechanisms that are definitely out there in our society. And I guess we're hoping that this conversation today between the three of us will just open up that that this isn't about being politically correct. This is about being respectful to fellow human beings. This is about being respectful to each other. And, we know that this is a challenge inside family systems. And I want to acknowledge that because, both of I've always said, I don't know how we're ever going to talk about race until we learn how to talk to each other. And this is what we're talking about, I think, isn't it? It's about being able to receive new information, and instead of resisting it or fighting it, being grateful for the information and adapting our way of relating accordingly. To me, it's so simple. I don't understand why people fight it. And when I listen to you, I just think of all the defense mechanisms that are in place, and all the ways that people don't stand up for what they know is right because they don't want to deal with the resistance that's going to come at them. So for instance, Vivienne, if somebody does refer to you as a gal, there might be way too many people that wouldn't say anything.
Right.
Just to not have to deal with the excuses or defenses that come at them. And, or on any of it,
And most people who say it don't know that they're being, most of the people that I know that say it to me do not know that they're being, offensive. And what I have started doing, and I really have always done, you don't have to be rude about it. It's just educate them as to why it's probably not a good term to be using to refer to me anyway. Because go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut over you, Marsha.
No, I was listening and I'm just reflecting on, I remember myself one time using the word gal. I was referring to that I was talking to a younger gal to try to help run a Facebook page. And I was talking to an older Black woman. And she touched my forearm and she said, Marsha, let me tell you why you shouldn't use the word gal. And she explained it to me. Mm-hmm. And I said, thank you very much for letting me know that, because I had, like you said, I had no idea. And now that I understand, it's easy to shift that. It's not a big deal.
It's not a big, exactly.
But it is a big deal when it's offending someone. And so I would much rather shift learn what is offensive and shift that than to continue to blindly offend and hurt, right?
Yeah. It's just like saying boy to a Black man. Come on, they were that. You heard, how many times do you hear that term whenever they're doing any kind of movie that has to do with slavery? I mean, that's all you hear the whole time, and it's very intimidating. I go back to my conversations with the late great Congressman John Lewis, and him telling me how it made him feel. Well, he had to learn how to not let it get to him the way that it did. But when you when white men would be calling him boy and all of this stuff, then he started being known as the boy from Troy. I forgot who started calling him that. And that's different. You just have to understand it in its context. So I think that some people are open to learn and they want to know the right thing. But as far as that, so you can't say anything anymore, you shouldn't have been saying it in the first place. So don't talk to me about, I have to walk on eggshells now and I can't say anything anymore. trust me, if it was offensive to me now, it was probably more offensive 20, 30 years ago when you were saying it. And now you're being called out on it. And you want to say, "Oh, I can't say anything anymore because I'm being offensive." Well, you were offensive back then, and you still are. You know, like I told you before, Marsha, just because you don't see strange fruit hanging from the tree, we still have modern day lynches.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So you know that we are making baby steps, but we are nowhere close to where we should be in accepting people, practicing cultural humility, embracing people, espousing diversity, ensuring equity. We're nowhere close.
We just what we want to do is save everybody. That's what we want to do. We want to educate and we want to save them from themselves. We don't want to recognize that there are, there's things that we don't know about these people. You know, the thing that happened recently in Jamaica with the pastor, what was his name? Dr. Kevin Smith. He was, I guess, born and raised in Jamaica, but then he moved to Canada, and then, that's where he practiced psychotherapy, and then he went back to Jamaica, opened this big church. And I mean, he was, he had multi-million-dollar mansions on the island, right? Because people were tithing to him $100,000 Jamaican dollars every month. And he was calling people witches and destroying families. He slashed somebody. One of his congregants cut the neck, like they slashed the neck, killed this woman, I want to say a couple of months ago, or it was just like last month, because she was found to be a witch because she didn't support the church. So he has this whole clip where he talks about, if you don't tithe, then you don't worship. And if you don't worship, then you are not a Christian and you deserve death. So he had his congregants out there killing people. And, it's so sad because this guy was, very popular. I mean, he had pictures with all sorts of politicians from all over the world. So they killed him. Apparently, I want to say yesterday, it was recent, they killed him on his way to I think he was going to get sentenced in Kingston. So they were transporting him from Montego Bay to Kingston. And on the way, he got into a car accident and they found that he was dead. But I brought that up because, again, we have this, when you're talking about cultural humility and the lack thereof, people are seeing that now and they're like, oh, these people in Jamaica are so stupid. How could you, fall for following somebody like him? He's so wicked. And how did you not know, that he was leading you guys down this, horrible path? I mean, when you have power, and that's what people forget, it's about power. So many of us don't have basic necessities. We don't have places to live that we can call our own. We don't have, running water that we can access as easily. We don't have the type of clothing that we need to survive certain seasons and things like. There's so much that we don't have. And people they completely forget the power dynamic that comes into play when we're looking at all these isms, It baffles me that we still don't understand this. How do we still not understand this,
Right. Yeah. That is absolutely insane. I'm sorry, because and that's what I was about to say. It sounds like mental health issues there, Marsha. But the same way that they followed Jim Jones over to Guyana, it's the same thing. There are people out here who need to belong. They need to belong to something. And it just so happens that that's something that they end up belonging to is leading them down a hole of darkness. But the reason is because they need to belong. Now, and that's a whole different podcast, because when you feel like you are isolated and you don't have anybody else, those are the type of people that are attracted to those things. So, it's cultish. It's like a cult. And unfortunately, like I said, that's a whole different podcast, but you understand what I mean, because it's all about belonging. It's all about, we talk about inclusivity, but inclusivity, that's great. But that whole piece for belonging, feeling as though you are really included, that's a tragedy. What you just said.
I'm imagining some of the resistance statements again. Things like, well, people just need to get a job. People just need to work. When you're talking about the things that you were mentioning as far as housing and clothing. And I think this again, because there's not constructive conversations, there's just kind of the media extremes that are constantly tossed around, or social media emoting that people do. It's hard for people to conceptualize that there's still this much difference in what people can access or not access, that it's not about laziness. It's not about lack of motivation. It's not about these sort of things. And so I know, Vivienne, you and Hilton and I had talked about this a little bit in a previous podcast, but so it's a big mess. And I guess, how do we circle this conversation so that we hope that the listeners that are listening in on this, that haven't thought about these things before, that a light bulb comes on and there's a new awareness of what they can do. I think oftentimes people might hear a conversation like this and then still feel kind of powerless or not know what it is they can do. Do you have any suggestions in that regard?
LJ, you want to go first, or?
Sure. I think that's a brilliant question and point to make, to be honest with you, because when you're listening to this, I think an immediate call to action for me would be, who in my circle do I need to have a real conversation with? Like, who do I actually need to give some time to? Because I think that with how things are going nowadays, everything is me by me. Everything is about me, and I think that that's what's ultimately destroying us. And this is how you see these types of cults, come and sustain themselves and grow so large and so powerful, because, again, to Vivienne's point, people want to belong. And that this me monster mentality, where you don't want to give people time, you don't want to be a part of things unless, it's lining your pockets. We have to check that. We have to check that tendency, that very uncivilized and very primal, want to just survive. We have to, get past that tendency, that urge, and actually start to pour into each other again. What can you do today to get on the phone with somebody and just say, hey, I'm here to listen. Let's just talk. I just want to know how things have been with you. Can we get together? I know it's still a pandemic. Can we meet outside and just spend some time together and just be together? I feel like that's like the first thing that I would do, is just to look around myself and say, who are the people that I say that I love and I care for? When's the last time I've spoken with them? And just leave it at that. Start there.
Yeah. Those are very good points that you made, LJ. I'm going to go back to the conversation that we had before, Marsha, when you and Hilton and I talked, and that was about how people think that everyone has access
Yes.
to things. And because we are not living in equitable excellence, okay, we don't, there are people who don't have, and they don't have access to it. They don't have the opportunity for it. The only reason why I am where I am today is because of opportunity. I was given the opportunity, but I have friends just down the road who cannot find themselves out. And people say, well, oh, well, if you made it, why don't you go and you help them? Well, I do help, but I can't be responsible for the whole world, right? I can be somewhat responsible to my village, but what I'm saying is that these people were never afforded the opportunity. It is unfair. And the reason why they weren't afforded the opportunity is because of the color of their skin. Seriously. I mean, and I would go a step further, Marsha. Now, I know I'm going to have a lot of people upset with me when I say what I'm about to say, but I was reading something this morning and the person was saying, oh, well, this person gave, it's the first person to say that they're going to give funding to HBCUs. And my response was, that's fine and dandy as long as you're not doing the funding to the HBCUs because you want to make sure you keep Black people in there and out of PWIs, okay, predominantly white institutions. So that's great if you're going to do the funding because you really care about the people that are going to these HBCUs. It's not okay if you're doing it because you don't want to make sure that they stay out of PWIs. Mm. But if you gave out reparations, okay, if you tell me that you're going to give out reparations to the descendants of all of the people who provided free service on plantations for all these years, then I feel like you're really doing something. You're focused on equity, and inclusivity. So don't talk to me about you're giving funds to to Black people, to a group of Black people that may not even need it because they may be okay in life, right? Okay, not every Black person needs assistance. But you need to start focusing on those who do and stop cutting all of these programs that are going to deny people who cannot afford certain things to be a part of society and contribute to society. So that may not make sense to most people, but that's what's on me today, and inspired by the fact that the person made a comment about what they were going to do with their funds for Black people. But keep in mind, there are two things. Not every Black person need assistance. Okay, not every Black person needs you to help them. They're doing fine. They're doing well. And also, not every Black person, what was the other? Well, Black people are people of color because, or underserved or underrepresented people. Those people are the people that really need your help, the people that are underserved. And not every Black person who comes to you, like when you're trying to build your diverse workplace or whatever, not every Black person understands what Black people went through. Mm. Because some Black people have had a silver spoon all their lives. So be intentional and know who you're talking to when you're speaking to Black people. or any other person of color. Sorry.
I think that really needs to be emphasized, that last statement, because it's those types of scenarios that perpetuate the biases that are in existence, and does then kind of paralyze any progress. And it just creates that emotional battle instead of really, I think part of what I'm hearing you say too is we have to stop. We have to really think about whether we are generalizing when we make statements, that nothing is true for everybody in any group.
Right.
However you narrow out that group, whether it's by sex or socioeconomic status or by race or however that might be. And I think that oftentimes there's way too much generalization.
Yeah.
And it's very harmful. And it's keeping us from being able to get over these other hurdles that we're trying to get over.
Yeah, it is very harmful. Again, I'll give you a good example, and I know we have to go because we we all have other things that are pressing right now. But again, when you encounter a person, this happened in the 70s. So there's a big company here in Virginia. These people own half of the things in Virginia, or at least at that time they did. And it was a white family. It was a white family. And and one of my relatives, I think one of my relatives used to work for them in their house. This young man, one of the sons, used to walk around with holes in his jeans before they became popular. Now everybody's paying $50 and $60 for them now today. But he would walk around with holes in his jeans, unshaven sometimes, holes in his t-shirt. His parents were filthy rich, and people would encounter him and do you need help? Have you eaten? All kinds of things, because they would see him walking about like that. And it was so funny because this was just how he was. That's how he lived. He knew he came from a family of privilege, but you did not know that from seeing him. And I say that because that's the same thing that I feel a lot of times when we meet people from different places. I mean, even when you meet somebody and they happen to look like you, right? And you say something to them and they don't respond. Hello, they might be from another country and they don't speak English. It has happened so many times. But I'm just saying, just because you can't go by what you see. That's just the surface of the culture iceberg. In order for you to know someone, you have to go into the deep surface of the culture iceberg. You will never know who they are. So just don't assume when you meet somebody just because of how they look, that don't categorize them, stereotype. Get to know the person. And the only way that you're going to get to know anybody and to understand how they live is to invite them into your world, or you invite yourself into theirs, so that you can gain a better understanding. Again, let me just say before I go that all people, just because you look at them and you think that they are a certain way, there's a new movie coming out called Passing, where they're black females, but they're passing for white, which is what some of my relatives did in New York. No one ever knew they were black. No one ever knew, because they wanted jobs. So that's what they did. And so I'm just saying, just because you see someone and and they may look like they need your help or your assistance. You need to really find out whether they do or not before you start reaching into your pocket to try to help them. I know it sounds like I'm just all over the place right now, but I'm just trying to make my point that you can't go by what you see. So
it's true.
Yeah,
like you said, with cultural humility too. I mean, it's like people don't even think about it on a simple level. It's like your parents, right? Like I don't think I will ever know my parents as people outside, right? Outside of our relationship, I don't think I'll ever know them as Juanita and LaDon. I know them as mom and dad, right?
Exactly.
So it's, thank you. I mean, it takes years. It takes different context. You have to learn people in different contexts. It takes a long time. Things happen with people's lives. And so, it's the same thing with cultural humility. I mean, how could you ever assume that you just, okay, I've had the mole. I know everything about Mexican culture. What?
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
Excuse me? No, and it's just like the language that we use. It's so easy because the whole Gruden situation, the coach that was fired from the Raiders, that whole situation, it's just really interesting conversations happening in the sports arena again, because, we're hearing these words, flying, boy, the F word. Mm-hmm. Where in the UK, I think they refer to it as a cigarette, but here it means something completely different. But when we look at the language that's been used and all the stuff that's been happening, it's again, it points to there's so much depth in the words that we speak. And it's like Marsha was saying too, like we have to get comfortable, I think, again, with relearning some of the things that we've taken for granted for so long. Like what is really racism in this context today? What is lynching because Vivienne said that. What is lynching today?
Right.
What we have to be able to study these things so well that we can see. I think it was Dr. Frances Cress Welsing that was talking about symbols and the importance of symbols. And she was saying it was so interesting in her book where she was talking about how when she goes to like Washington, D.C., and she goes to these other places where there's a lot of symbols, like the Washington Monument being this huge white penis, right? That's what she was saying among all these black people in D.C. in the Capitol. What is that supposed to mean? What's the symbology? When she talks about all of that, it's so interesting because she was saying that it's like a tacit knowledge for her. Like as being an African woman, she's like, I knew this from when I was born. She was like, I just knew something wasn't right, before she went and studied. It's so interesting, but there's something, I feel like there's something to that. And I feel like we all have something like that that's been repressed because it's not learned, it's not refined, it's not sophisticated. It's just something that you can't explain.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. And I'm glad to know that someone else thought the same thing I thought when I saw the monument. But but another thing too is, Marsha, remember Dr. Grant was on with us, Dr. Ernest Grant, and he was talking about the American Nurses Association and him being the first Black male president. But what I thought about as I was reading something that one of my students turned in, she was talking about 1965. In 1965, the American Nurses Association suggested that the BSN, the bachelor's, be the entry level to nursing. Well, it got me to thinking, and I'll get in trouble again, but it's good trouble, so I'm okay. It's always good trouble. But it got me thinking, 1965, that's the same year that John Lewis and those other people marched across the bridge, the Selma March, along with my cousin Curtis Harris. That was the same year. Isn't that the same year that L.B. Lyndon B. did the Civil Rights Act? Isn't that the same year? I'm thinking it was. Anyway, there were a lot of sit-ins and all kinds of things happening then. I don't want to think that maybe they suggested that it be BSNs, that bachelors would be the entry level into nursing, because they knew most Black people were either nurse aides, nursing assistants, that would exclude them. And also that at that time, a lot of Black people were not allowed to go to these predominantly white institutions. So I just hate to think that that was what it was about. But you just can't help but think about these things. And I know I've gotten us off into a whole different, that's what I do. I'm sorry, listeners. That's kind of who I am. As the thought comes into my mind, I just say it. My mom always told me that my mouth was going to be my ruin. I understand. So I'm going to leave you with that, and the fact that, I always have to say, leave you with John Lewis. I always do. If you see something that is not right, not just, and not fair, say something, do something, get into good trouble, necessary trouble. Do not let people say things and you hear them and you don't say anything when you know they're wrong. Do something.
Yes.
Thank you, Marsha.
LJ, anything else you want to say and wrap up?
Amen.
All right. Thank you so much, both of you, for spontaneously participating in this conversation today. And I'm sure we'll be back on Operation F.L.O.W. Thanks.